From 1978 to 1990, a monster stalked the Soviet Union, preying on women and children in the most brutal ways imaginable. He became known as the Butcher of Rostov, a killer who left a trail of horror across the country, evading capture for over a decade. With 52 confirmed murders, Andrei Chikatilo's reign of terror finally came to an end when DNA evidence linked him to the gruesome crimes. This is the chilling story of Andrei Chikatilo, Russia's most notorious serial killer. Born in 1936 in Ukraine, Andrei Chikatilo's early life was marked by poverty and trauma. His troubled upbringing, combined with deep psychological issues, set the stage for what would later become a series of horrific crimes. By 1978, Chikatilo began targeting women and children, luring them to isolated areas under false pretenses, only to unleash violence that shocked investigators and terrified the Soviet public. Chikatilo's killing spree began in 1978, with his first victim being a 9-year-old girl whom he lured into a forest and brutally murdered. This marked the beginning of what would become one of the most horrifying serial killing sprees in history. His victims were typically women and children, lured with promises of food, money, or companionship. Once isolated, Chikatilo unleashed unimaginable violence, stabbing, mutilating, and sexually assaulting his victims. Chikatilo's crimes were exceptionally brutal, with many of his victims found with their bodies grotesquely mutilated. He targeted the most vulnerable members of society, and for over a decade he successfully avoided capture, blending into Soviet life and moving across different regions. The Soviet Union of the 1980s was not prepared for a serial killer of Chikatilo's magnitude. At the time, serial killers were considered a Western phenomenon, and Soviet authorities were reluctant to acknowledge that one could exist within their borders. As a result, the investigation was slow and plagued with missteps. The sheer scale of Chikatilo's crimes, combined with his ability to evade capture, left law enforcement frustrated and the public terrified. Over the course of a decade, dozens of bodies were discovered, but police were no closer to identifying the killer. Hundreds of innocent men were interrogated, and some were even wrongfully convicted of his crimes. In 1984, Chikatilo was arrested on suspicion of being the Rostov Ripper after acting suspiciously near a crime scene. However, due to a lack of solid evidence, he was released. The missed opportunity allowed Chikatilo to continue his killing spree for several more years, claiming the lives of many more victims. It wasn't until 1990 that investigators would finally catch a break. Advances in forensic science allowed investigators to match DNA from crime scenes to Chikatilo's blood. The turning point came in November 1990, when Chikatilo was arrested near a train station, where he had been seen acting suspiciously, an area where several bodies had been found. Once in custody, investigators collected his blood, and DNA tests confirmed that Chikatilo was the man responsible for the brutal murders. After years of terror, the Butcher of Rostov was finally behind bars. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Chikatilo confessed to the murders. Over several days, he detailed the gruesome nature of his crimes, explaining how he lured victims, killed them, and mutilated their bodies. Chikatilo admitted to 52 murders, though some believe the actual number could be higher. His confessions were chilling, revealing a man who felt no remorse for the atrocities he committed. Chikatilo explained that he killed out of a deep, uncontrollable rage and a desire to dominate his victims. In 1992, Chikatilo was put on trial in a courtroom that was filled with the families of his victims. The trial was a spectacle, with Chikatilo often behaving erratically, claiming insanity to avoid responsibility for his crimes. But his confessions, along with the overwhelming evidence, painted a clear picture of a man who was fully aware of his actions. Chikatilo was found guilty of 52 murders and sentenced to death. His trial marked the end of one of the darkest chapters in Soviet criminal history. On February 14, 1994, Andrei Chikatilo was executed by a single gunshot to the head. His death brought closure to a nation that had been haunted by his crimes for over a decade. But for the families of his victims, the scars of his brutality would remain forever. Chikatilo's reign of terror left a lasting impact on Russia's criminal justice system, leading to changes in how serial killers were identified and investigated. His crimes serve as a chilling reminder of the horrors that can lurk behind a seemingly ordinary facade. Andrei Chikatilo's brutal legacy as the Butcher of Rostov is one of the darkest chapters in modern history. His calculated and sadistic killings terrorized the Soviet Union for over a decade. And though justice was ultimately served, the horror he left behind remains unforgettable. His story stands as a terrifying reminder of the depths of human depravity. What do you think of the horrific case of Andrei Chikatilo? Could law enforcement have caught him sooner? And how did his crimes change the way Russia handled serial killers? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.